I want to spend a bit of time now on culture. Company culture is just so unbelievably important. If you can find the passion and culture in your team and grow a business that's based around the culture that is, the ethos as to why you set this up, you can create so much more impact. You can create a team that will go way further beyond what you've asked of them, and you'll achieve so much more. Somebody once said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you've got a team with the right culture, they'll find their way to achieve the goals way more than just giving them the best strategy to achieve the goals. If you've got the right people, it's ultimately it's much better to train the right people to have the right skills as opposed to recruiting people that have got the skills but that aren't the right culture fit. So we want to talk a bit about that. And one of the stories that I love on this is a story actually from there's a few versions of this story, but the version that I am aware of most is around Sir Christopher Wren, and when he was rebuilding, I'm not sure whether it was St. Paul's, but he was rebuilding a cathedral. And the story goes that he saw three workmen laying bricks, but he saw one stooped over and kind of not, on his knees and kind of working very slowly. One sort of working fairly actively, but not looking okay. And then one thriving and laying bricks like he was a man possessed. And he went along and he spoke to each one and he said, "Excuse me, what are you?" So the first one, "And what are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm laying bricks so that I can go home and feed my family." Goes to the second one, says, "I am building a cathedral." And the third one he asks, and he says, "I'm building the house of God." Now that ultimately is the power of purpose, isn't it? If we know why we're doing something, we will achieve so much more. We will drive so much further. And we saw this on the podcast. We interviewed, actually before you were co-host, actually interviewed Krista Cullen. Krista Cullen went to school in Oakham. She scored the goal that allowed Team GB to win a gold medal in hockey in Rio Olympic Games. She actually was brought into the team having retired from hockey 2 years earlier. So she went through, did the Olympics before Rio, which I think was that Beijing, I think it was. And they didn't win the medal, and or maybe they did win a medal, but they certainly didn't win the gold. And she retired, had 2 years of not playing hockey, and then they were in the build-up to the Rio Olympics, and the coach got in contact with her. She was living out in Kenya by this point, and she said, "I really want you to come into the team." She said, "Well, I haven't played hockey for 2 years." But part of bringing her in was the culture and the drive and the team ethos that she could bring to it. And it was a term that gets referred to as role modeling. So, for example, when I saw Sir David Brailsford speak, he talked about how they do role modeling within cycling teams. So they'll bring the young upstart in to hang around with the Bradley Wigginses and the Geraint Thomases, because by hanging around them, they learn so much more. And so this whole role modeling in teams is really important. We used to have, when we had a bigger team, we'd have a shadow role for each role in the business, didn't we? So that we knew if this person is off sick or this person is on holiday, that's the person but it allows them to spend more time learning and growing and building as a team. And, if you've got a really good culture, it's amazing what you can achieve. So the team that I think probably has as good a culture as I have ever read about was the All Blacks. And they have this whole very well documented culture that James Kerr talks about in his book called Leadership. But two of them that stood out to me are no dickheads. So that is one of the things listed in their culture. And the other is sweep the sheds. So no dickheads is about making everybody grounded, and nobody is an egomaniac. But the sweeping the sheds is a brilliant thing where, so at the end of each game, what they would have is essentially their equivalent of the leadership team, which would be the sort of top 4 players in the team at the time, obviously captain and vice captain, and 2 other key players. So after the game, everyone would leave the dressing room except those 4 players, and those 4 players would then sweep the dressing room. It was all about bringing that ethos of, you know, there is no job too small. We're all a team. We're all here to build this team together. And the best example is so the 4th choice New Zealand fly half, for which I made a note as to which World Cup it was, and I can't remember now. 2011. 2011. So 2011 World Cup. How did you know there was 2011? Oh, well, there we go. Thank you. Yeah. I was like, bloody hell. I got a statter in the room. And I totally, and she worked for me 10 years and I didn't know that she was a fanatic of rugby. So 4th choice fly half, didn't get picked to go with the World Cup squad to the World Cup. And so he deletes the coach's number off his phone in an act of frustration, and he goes off fishing in New Zealand on holiday. And he gets a call from an unrecognised number, and he answers it, and it's the coach saying, so-and-so's injured, so-and-so's injured, can you get out here? We need you in the squad. In the final, the fly half that was playing got injured, and this guy has to come on and he kicks the winning points in the World Cup final. So that is an example of how, you know, if the culture wasn't as strong as it is for the All Blacks, that would be I think that would be very difficult and very unlikely to happen. But the culture of the All Blacks is quite amazing. And there's some research that's been done in business around company culture that looked at, that said there's basically 3 types of teams. There's the professionals, which are the ones that are, you know, they've got all the amazing qualifications. There's the stars, which are like the, you know, the guy that always does really well and achieves everything. And then there's the committed, and the committed are the ones that just make it happen regardless. So there's those 3 groups, the professionals, the stars, and the committed. And if you group teams into those categories, the team that always comes out best, pretty much always, but by far and away across, like, if you look at the wider scale, it's the committed team. So you don't have to pick the all-star employee, you don't have to pick the person with the best qualifications, but you do have to have a team that's committed and driven towards that purpose and passion. And that's how that's what we need, why we need to build a company with culture. So to go back to Disney, it's a very strange photo, this one. So this photo is quite interesting because, and I'm not going to ask you to guess which one, but Carol, my wife, is in that photo. She was actually the penguin out of Mary Poppins. So Carol started her career as a buyer at Woolworths. She was, I think, the youngest ever buyer at Woolworths. She then left and became joined Disney and was a director in their licensing division. But when she was about probably 28 when she got the job at Disney. But this is an office job, very much. But at Disney, they don't call them employees, they are cast members. So she joins Disney and they say, right, okay, all of our cast members above a certain grade, their first week is spent in the park. So first week working for her new company, she gets shipped off to Euro Disney, and she spends part of that time, she spends a day being trained to be the penguin of Mary Poppins, learning the signature, kind of they do this big thing where they get all dressed up in a room, and then they kind of reveal the curtains, and then they sort of see themselves. But they get to go out into the park. They're never any of the like Minnie and Mickey, mainly because she's not like 4'8" and Chinese, but also obviously they're much more strict around that. But all of these people were new employees within Disney, and they're going out into the park, seeing the smiles on the kids' faces, signing the signatures and all that sort of stuff. How do you think what sort of impact do you think that created on every one of those people? Absolutely kind of immediately gets them to buy into the culture of what it takes to be a cast member. And in fact, so in Disney, you're either, if you work in the offices, you tend to be a cast member. If you're a waiter or a waitress, you're a host or a hostess. They don't have a crowd in Disney. If there's lots of people in a particular place, they have an audience. The terminology we use is really important, and how we build that culture is really powerful. And I think how we build that culture is also around how we understand from everyone in the business what could be done better. So there's a great story around when Walt Disney was still there. So he was going around one of the parks, and they got a ride and they were going to redesign a ride or revamp it or whatever. And he went up to this 18-year-old lad. This 18-year-old lad who's been working at Disney for a few months, and Walt Disney said, "What could we do to make this ride better?" And the 18-year-old lad's like, "My God, I can't believe why this is Walt Disney and he's asking me what I can do to make this better." But after he sort of got over his shock, he said, "Well, actually, we need to make the height of the ride carriage higher, because every other person bangs their head on this as they get in." Walt Disney shortly afterwards goes to get into the ride, bangs his head, like, okay, absolutely, the 18-year-old is right. So asking and getting that constant flow of ideas from everyone in the business is part of that culture, and certainly was at Disney. And Disney also had there's a guy called Van France who created Disney University. So to create this experience where people right from the off within Disney could embrace that culture and really kind of understand what it meant to be a part of Disney. That's why they created the Disney University. And Van France would be constantly looking at ways of how can we refine what this culture is, and how can we refine the quality of the parks. So one of the things that he would do is, apparently if you wander around with a camera at Disney and offer to take professional photos, basically everyone just sees you as a photographer, and as a result you get so much more feedback from people. So that's what he would do, and he created this whole university. And it kind of made me think back to, we used to have videos on vision and all of that sort of stuff that people would watch in the first week of their employment. And for the new businesses, we don't really have any of that, I don't think, do we? But I was actually chatting to, we've got a new girl that's rented one of the desks upstairs called Caroline. She's just started a new job. She's working remotely, and she's working from here to do it. I said, "So how was your first day?" She said, "Well, I didn't get dialed in until 2 o'clock. They couldn't get any of the, none of the passwords worked. I couldn't do any of this stuff. And then by 5 o'clock, they said, all right, now we've got this project that's on. Can you meet the deadline by Friday?" She's like, "I don't even know what the project is." But that to me is not a great way to start. I'm hoping that Sarah's not sitting here going, "Well, that's exactly what happened to me." But but that experience of what happens when somebody joins you that first week, for me, the first week should be about learning about the company and the vision and the passion and the culture, and if you do that, you can create a really amazing impact right from the start. The company that I think best summarizes building a company with culture is a company called Zappos. Do you all know what Zappos does? So Zappos was the first company to really sell shoes online successfully. It was created by a guy called Tony Hsieh, who's sadly died since, but he sold it for over $1 billion to Amazon. His statement was always business was about delivering happiness, which actually is very similar to what Disney's was. So perhaps there's a link there. But this culture of happiness was all about trying to deliver the most exceptional customer service possible. And Tony Hsieh tells a story of where they were at a big party. He was with one of the directors at Skechers, and he was kind of raving about how good the culture and the customer service was at Zappos. And I can't remember exactly how it worked, but he basically said that was it. They get to midnight, they want some room service, they want pizza, the room service won't deliver them pizza, and they've already been joking about how amazing the customer service is at Zappos. And somehow somebody suggests that this director at Skechers Shoes phones the Zappos customer service line and see if they can help him find pizza. Now, they're a shoe retailer. They've got no business in helping him find pizza at midnight. But after the guy on customer service's initial shock at the request, he actually went off, found and was able to come back and say, look, this company is open. You phone this number, you can get your pizza ordered. And it totally blew the director at Skechers away. And it's one of the reasons why I had such a strong relationship with Skechers thereafter. But they defined their purpose was to live and deliver wow, and their values were things like deliver wow through service, be passionate and determined, embrace, drive, and change, be humble, do more with less. That is a thing that comes up time and again in culture. Do more with less. Like if we go back to that front stage concept. Some of the ideas that we have around creating an amazing front stage, like the Elliot's Magic Ticket, it cost nothing, but they created an impact with no extra resource. Build open and honest relationships with communication. So I think determining these values is really important, and actually Zappos kind of took it out to a further level, and they determined what behaviours look like, what the right behaviours were. What behaviors do we punish? What behaviors do we reward? What are the priorities? Disney had their own version of this. So for Disney, it was innovate, educate, support, and entertain. So for everything that they do, it's about, right, okay, if we're going to do something in this area, how do we innovate? How do we educate? How do we support? And how do we entertain? Netflix also have an amazing company culture, and it's something that's documented quite a lot. I've talked about the book No Rules Rules, but essentially their company culture is all about building up on talent density, getting the best people that they can, look to increase candor, and the final way, which we've talked about a bit, is find ways to remove controls. So the fact that they have no holiday policy, you have as much holiday as you want if you work for Netflix, as long as you hit the goals that you're set, and there is no expenses policy either. You just have to be able to justify that it was in the best interests of the company that money was spent. And we need to empower our employees to make decisions that when we employ people, we employ them because we trust them. We need to demonstrate that trust by allowing them to make decisions that are for the benefit of the business. And I think that the more we can do that, the better. Disney actually have a great decision-making process, which is safe, courtesy, show, efficiency. So what that's doing is an employee is, if the employee is sitting there going, oh my God, something is going wrong, the first question is, okay, what's the decision that I need to make it safe? Is the right, if something, let's say a ride was breaking, okay, safety is the first priority, therefore I do this. Then it's courtesy, being polite, making sure it's and then it's the show. So like we think of Disney, the show is the most important thing, but actually every employee knows that safety and courtesy is more important. And then finally, efficiency. Oh, thank you. Efficient portfolio, we had decision-making process as well. We had legal, compliant, team interest, client interest. So this tells us two things. Firstly, obviously, you've got to remain legal, and then you've got to remain compliant. But if something is going wrong, the team is more important than the client. we have to look after the team first in a process as opposed to the client first. Because ultimately, if we've got no team, we got no clients. So that was the process that we had. So it's worth thinking about that. But I read Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh while I was on a holiday in Crete, actually. I came back and was like, right, we need to document our culture in the same way that Zappos did. And we went through a process. We did this together, and I'd really encourage you to do this as a team if you've got a team. But if you are, at the start of building a team, it's really important that you get this down anyway. And we crafted what it meant to be a part of Efficient Portfolio, what we were all about. So some of these things you'll see a similarity between what we saw at Zappos, because guess what? That's what I just read at the time. So embrace fun and be a little quirky was our take on their piece. Deliver wow through client service, again, our take on their piece. But pursue growth and learning. We were always and still are always about reading more books, watching more, everything, constant, that growth mindset. And then constant and never-ending improvement. So always looking for ways to get better and better and better. Open and honest relationships. So I had a member of my team that got caught telling lies. And as soon as, and they weren't particularly big or important lies, but as soon as that person, as soon as we found that out, we're like, well, now we can never believe anything that person ever says again. We had one instance where a mistake by one of my team, ultimately it's our processes, we took responsibility for it, but one of the team did something that meant that the client lost quite a chunk of money. Obviously the client ended up getting it back. We made sure of that in the long run, but he expected to get fired for that process, for his role in that process. We didn't fire him because we had just spent a shitload of money training him on how to do something more efficiently. But he stayed employed for many, many years after, because he had the honest and open relationship approach to say, yeah, I screwed up on that thing. Whereas somebody that made a much smaller mistake but constantly tried to cover up that mistake and lie was not the person for this business. But one thing is for sure, when we documented this approach, or what it meant to be a part of Efficient Portfolio, the very next day and thereafter, the team were it felt like somebody had switched a light bulb on, and the whole team acted differently from that day onwards. And I'm sure it's partly because they also helped create this culture. And there's a thing called the Florida effect. I don't know if you heard about the Florida effect. Have I talked about the Florida effect? So the terminology, the Florida effect, comes from an experiment that was a social experiment that was done, where they got a load of people, people in to do a test. And essentially, they did two versions of this test. One involved, so they would walk in from the lift, they would go into this room to do the test. And for one group of people, the test was around just normal terminology and vocabulary. And for the second group of people, it was exactly the same test, but it was worded around words that were associated with being old. And it was done in the US, so Florida is associated with being old, hence the name. But it was like all of the words and terminology were around being old or older or retired or aging. Exactly the same type of group of people, exactly the same questions, just worded slightly differently. The main point of the test was nothing to do with the answers. It was all about how quickly did the two groups walk back to the lift after they'd done the test. The group that had all of the old related terminology walked dramatically slower back. It was like they'd aged through this quiz, because all of the vocabulary had been around being old and retired. This is the impact you can have by having, if you've documented the right culture in your business. It is like somebody goes, oh, hang on, this is what it means to be a part of this company. I will act like that. We're using the vocabulary we want to have happen. We also really want to build a culture that has a positive mindset. I think there's There's always people in this world that will look at the lovely, beautiful view and focus on the steaming pile of shit in the corner. Well, so we want to try and, through positive vocabulary, create that positive mindset. But also, I think it's a really important part of the recruitment process of recruiting people with a more positive outlook. And of course, we've talked about growth mindset earlier on, but installing a growth mindset in people in the team, as well as embracing it, is really important. Certainly, Sir Clive Woodward talks about this in terms of rock and sponges. You know, a rock is somebody that is, I know all of this, I'm not going to learn, whereas a sponge is somebody that's keen to learn and grow. Those, to me, are the people that we want to be recruiting. And in fact, Steve Jobs, part of Steve Jobs' recruitment process was to show them the Mac. And if their eyes lit up, they got the job. If their eyes didn't light up, then they didn't get the job. It was as straightforward as that, because he could see the passion in somebody's eyes. But once you've documented this culture, you can recruit like Google recruit. So if you read about Google and their recruitment process, they've clearly documented their culture, but their recruitment process is about asking interview questions for each of those culture pieces. So when I interview people, as Sarah will attest to, I go through a question that relates to each of the different parts of the business culture, because I'm trying to understand whether Sarah fits our culture of constant, never-ending improvement and wow through client service. So it comes back to that. If you can find the right people, you can train them into the right skills piece. Finding the right people is the most difficult piece. So I think that's really important. And one way you can enhance this is at Efficient Portfolio, we used to have the culture book. So each year we would ask each employee what it meant to be a part of Efficient Portfolio. And we would put together a book of photos and phrases of what the team, what the business had done, events. We used to do this every year. So we've got these all lined up for every year. We're not doing it in the new businesses. And I think it's something as we grow, we should definitely be doing. This was another idea from Zappos. But it's a way of continuing to build that culture, but it also is a great recruitment tool. It's also a lovely thing to have in reception, because this is the thing that clients are picking up and looking at and going, wow, this is different. I don't see this in other companies. It also, defining that culture helps it kind of gradually drain away over time, or stops it draining away over time. There's a great story. I was re-listening to some books on Disney as part of this. And when they were launching Disneyland in, I think it was the Tokyo one. There's two in Asia, isn't there? There's Tokyo and, no, it's not Singapore. I think it is China. Yeah. Yeah, no. Oh, yeah. Well, there's two in Asia anyway. There's one in, no, I think there's one in Tokyo, and isn't there one in China? I think. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I think it was the one in Japan. So they're about to launch the new Disneyland in Japan. They ship the special effects team out, and they spend ages and a fortune building, getting the haunted house to be as it should be, ready for launch day. And then the Japanese cleaners went in and they got rid of all of the cobwebs and cleaned all of the stuff out, because ultimately, when you're growing, the culture, it's very difficult to retain that culture. So actually, what we need to do is, by building things like the culture book and really clearly defining it, and then recruiting through it, we can retain it more. And we always linked our team's bonuses to the company culture as well. And I think we should do that, continue to do that more and more, is kind of have a bonus structure that is directly linked to constant never-ending improvement, wowing clients, etc., etc. I'm going to skip over that because I've told that story before. One of the things that I think is really kind of worth talking about when we talk about culture is, again, the physical environment that our team is in. So there's a thing called the Allen curve, and the Allen curve is essentially looking at how was your communication impacted by the distance of separation? And what they found was the further away people were from each other, the less they communicated, and essentially the more the company culture drained away. I have told the story before, but for some of you who won't have heard it, but when Pixar were recreating or building their new premises, Steve Jobs made the point of making a massive atrium so that people bumped into each other. And that was all about creating collisions, because ultimately, when employees are creating, bumping into different people, it sparks conversations, which creates new opportunities to build that culture and grow. And everything I have read, and I've read a few books on culture at the moment recently, everything I've read has said the walls destroy culture. Open plan office is better than private offices. Being in the same office is better than working from home. It's really, really difficult to retain culture remotely. There are things that you can do, and I'm going to come on to what those are, but I think ultimately the more people are in the office, the stronger the culture will be. And that everything I've read comes back to that, because ultimately walls create barriers between different people. But in this world, we also need to be able to work remotely, and people do want to work remotely. And we've proven that we can have a business that thrives while we're working remotely. But I do think, in my experience, the culture suffers, and I think the more conversations I've had with business owners, the more I think that is a common problem. But one of the books I read on this to try and work out, well, okay, how can we improve the culture whilst retaining some of that digital flexibility, was a book called Remote, Not Distant. And essentially what that concluded was, if we want to have a good culture whilst also working remotely, then it's really, really important that we cultivate trust and transparency. So we build a foundation of trust and transparency across all levels of the organization. So that becomes really, really important. We also really need to embrace flexibility whilst maintaining accountability. So I think the accountability piece is the really important piece. If the reason that Netflix can get away with having no holiday policy is because they've got a brilliant accountability structure to say, these are all the numbers, you hit those numbers, and I don't care if you do it in 6 weeks, 6 months, or the whole year. You've got to have that really, really well defined for that to work. The next one was to foster connection and community. So thinking about overcoming physical distance to build a sense of belonging and community among the team members. So that could be organizing in-person meetings or virtual meetings. We used to do the water cooler chat during COVID. So we'd just all dial in, do breakout rooms, and it wasn't a work chat, although it could be. And it was just about putting people into different groups to randomly talk. Certainly, it talks about prioritizing well-being and support. So if we want to build a strong culture whilst doing it remotely, then we need to think about how we can do that. Definitely about constant, never-ending improvement, so continuous learning and making sure that that's available to people. And then finally, it was about emphasizing and reinforcing the company's values. And I think that this is a really important one, because we can define our company culture, but how often, it comes back to what I said to you, Claire, where should your story go? Everywhere. Where should the EP code go? It should be on the wall. And it probably won't be the EP code going forward. Although maybe it is. There's no reason to change it, is it? Yeah. But it should be on the wall. It should be on the website. It should be on your materials. It should be everywhere, because it's like you talk about with goal setting. If you're talking about your company's goals to your team, just when you think you can't say it another time, that's the point where your team is starting to get it, because it doesn't have the same impact, the same as it does for you as the business owner. the same with the values. But obviously, there's some technology that you can use to help you along the way. So there's loads of different tools out there. Some of the ones that I will so obviously there's a lot of these that you will know about. Teams being the obvious one as a good way of collaborating, and Zoom. There was a few here that stood out that I thought we don't use and we maybe should be exploring. So Trello is a project management app which we have played around, or I have played around with, but never really used as a team. Asana is a work management platform and helps teams plan, organize, and track their work progress better. Kahoot I've used socially. My godsons are great at creating Kahoot quizzes, but actually gamification and making quizzes as part of the business I thought was a really interesting idea. Loom, I'm assuming, do you know of Loom? Yeah, okay, brilliant. So Loom is a way of creating short videos and sending those. So that would be a great tool. Another one that I haven't tried, but I thought was an interesting one to explore was 15Five, which is a performance management tool that encourages regular feedback, goal setting, and check-ins. Might be worth looking at. And also Miro, I have used Miro for sort of online collaborative whiteboarding type work. But those sorts of tools are ways that you can try and retain that culture whilst working remotely.